So let me start with the fact that when I was a teenager, that's age 12, 13, both my parents passed away. So that then required me to really look at life and people and survival in a very different way. And I had my younger brother with me. So speaking of women in leadership and at that time girlhood, I felt responsible for him. For me at that time, the overriding sense was the need to survive and to get up, dress up, show up. Whatever day it is, just show up for it.
Sometimes we are afraid to do something. You fear shame. I don't want shame. We're trying to break that burden by sharing stories of courage, resilience, and we want to be able to celebrate your story.
Shameless.
Welcome, and I am so glad to be on today's episode. We've got Katya Nyangi as our guest for today. I am Dzikamai Gangaidzo, the host of the Shameless podcast, and I am absolutely thrilled to have on the episode, I believe it's our first Kenyan guest. Congratulations, for you are our first Kenyan guest.
Yeah, great. Thank you for hosting me on this podcast. Yes, I'm from Kenya. I'm mixed race, half Kenyan, half Russian.
Wait, hold on. You're going to have to Russian. So
yes,
did you speak Russian?
I do. And I also speak Swahili.
And you speak Swahili and Russian.
Yes.
I do suspect that we will not have many people who speak both Swahili and Russian on the program. So I've taken notes. You will be in the Hall of Fame for that one. Mm-hmm. So I've got a question. I see here that you are a seasoned growth marketing and stakeholder engagement leader. Can you please unpack that from you? What does that mean?
Yeah, so it means that the marketing I look at is marketing that is supposed to drive growth and revenue generation for the organization I represent, but at the same time, making sure that we have strong relationships with our stakeholders and shared value relationships and nurturing those as well so that we can achieve our mutual goals.
And so when you go stakeholder engagement, in my mind, that sounds like a lot of listening to understand, and then looking for opportunities where both parties are able to win. So you're always trying to see how your interests can be served, but you are propelling the interests and the growth of whoever client you're representing. Would that be fair?
Yes, that would be fair. And I work in education. So our shared goals would be around educating, young people and giving them access to opportunities, whether it's for entrepreneurship, for upskilling, for employment, focusing on the continent. So that's the shared goal I approach it with.
So I'm not going to go further because we're going to really unpack this, because I'm so curious around education across the continent, what that also means across different demographics such as females, and what you might have experienced or seen. So let's put a pin on that one, and let's rewind. Let's go all the way back. What made you who you are today? And maybe we can start like way back, like when you were younger.
So the reason that I connect well with people, a strong element of the work that I do is built and nurtured through my, I would say, early childhood and teenagehood experiences more than any sort of, professional development or education. So let me start with the fact that when I was a teenager, that's age 12, 13, both my parents passed away. So that then required me to really look at life and people and survival in a very different way. And I had my younger brother with me. So speaking of women in leadership and at that time girlhood, I felt responsible for him. But at the same time, as a young girl, you're already facing the barriers of just being a girl in society, and some of the needs, whether they are soft needs or practical needs that you have at that time. So, of course, one of them was ensuring that we were able to continue our education. And that's definitely one of the reasons education is something I'm passionate about. And, like the work I do, I love the work I do, and I love that I work in education. So I would say that was definitely a key highlight event in my life that made me who I am.
It is a very tall ask for you as a 12 or 13-year-old to now take on such a heavy burden. And if you don't mind, if you were to go back, what would you say you felt within that period? Like, what is the overriding emotion, and how did you then overcome that?
For me at that time, the overriding sense was the need to survive and to just something I still use and say even now. It's like, get up, dress up, show up. Whatever day it is, just show up for it.
Get up, dress up, show up.
Get up, dress up, show
up.
The way I'm able to, in whatever state I'm able to, just do what you can, the best you can for that day. And I think that was my initial kind of mentality before I got to that phase of actually processing the grief around that.
And so the first thing to you was survival, and that must have been difficult. Was that?
It was definitely difficult, but at that time, that's the reality I knew. So I didn't have anything else to compare it to. And right now, in this era where there's this exposure to so much on the internet, all these lifestyles, all these, they call it toxic positivity, which I would say luckily I didn't have access to. So I was managing my reality based on what I was experiencing directly around me, and not saying through social media or perceptions of what is right and wrong out there, which then requires you to build your strength really from within yourself.
So you had this moment, this event within your life. Your brother is with you. You take up a role of leading going forward. Then how then do you get through high school and then subsequent years down the line? What did that look like for you then?
Yeah, so my story is quite complex. How that journey evolved is I ended up spending some time in Russia, where my mother was from. And that definitely influenced even my personality and how I felt about certain things, like my interest in art and all that. And then, given that my family became Catholic later in life, so I was not born Catholic, we developed like a relationship with the Catholic Church. So I ended up living in a Catholic missionary setting when I came back to Kenya with my brother. And out of that, I was able to access education like in the Catholic school, but it wasn't that it was for free. I was just, I would say, lucky that I met a lady, a woman who wanted to sponsor a girl child, and then someone referred her to me, and she was the one who enabled me to get through my education. And by the time I was 16, I was already looking for ways to earn some money, and I would do like adverts and skits for new product launches, that kind of things that I was able to access. At that time, there wasn't AI and all this. Everything was done already. Like, you need real photo shoot with the real product. Yeah. And that enabled us to also contribute towards my brother's school fees. So I guess it was that determination plus the luck.
But that's the beauty of life, right? So in the end of the day, you can find luck, or luck can find you, despite whatever context that you find yourself in. And then the key is what you make out of that luck that finds you. Because if you didn't actually see that and take that opportunity, you'd have missed out on the progression and where you've ended up being now. Is that fair or wrong?
Yes, that's fair.
And so would you say that you created your own luck, or would you say that sometimes it felt as though somebody was watching or looking over you?
I just approach this with humility, because at the end of the day, we really cannot predict the outcome of anything. We can prepare the best that we can. Even in our work lives, we do projections, we do all this, and we prepare the best that we can. But ultimately, there's always other factors that we can't fully explain that come into play to bring something together. And even the fact that you maybe would be someone who's determined to pursue an opportunity or recognize that luck and take advantage of it, we're not all, predisposed to that.
I would like to, at this point, I want to jump a few years. And I'm very curious to understand, you compile data for books and publications, and you also contribute as a writer for Marketing Africa. Can you explain to me where that side of you fits into this piece of the puzzle?
Yeah, I think I've always been drawn to stories, and even going back to that time of my life as a teenager, I felt that stories were my companions. They were like friends.
Yeah.
And so I feel there's such a great power in stories, and so much to learn from it for yourself, but also to give someone the opportunity to tell their story. But also, I'm also grateful that a lot of people have honored me with their stories and, their vulnerabilities. So I also have some human interest stories on my blog, byawoman.com.
Can you say that again?
Byawoman.com. Yeah.
Byawoman.com. So
yes. And I think the way I've approached storytelling differently is it's not been sitting behind my computer researching and writing a story, including those that I interviewed, for certain publications. It was really like spending time in the persons of people's environment and observing alongside having conversations to put the stories together.
Okay, wow. So now I'm absolutely curious. We talked about you having to take a role and leading as a female and some of the challenges at a very young age. And you talk about education within entrepreneurship across the continent. So my first question to you is about women leadership. And what does that look like? What does that mean to you within the African context?
Within the African context, I would say women are natural leaders. They're born leaders because the context in which we are born into require that leadership. And even if we look at the history of how our communities were designed, women's roles in the home were still quite economic, whether it was on the farms, whether it was whatever duties they were doing. They were considered, an economic contribution to that community or to that homestead. But I think over time and industrial revolution and, dividing who works where and how within the African context has then, brought that drift in terms of women in leadership and men going into the workplace and women having domesticated roles in the home. And this role not considered to be of economic value, which is one of the issues I have with things like GDP and how we measure that doesn't account for the contribution such as caregiving, which is one big role, and I'd say it's a leadership role that women play and how that enables economic growth.
And I want to just unpack that a little bit. So in your view, the biggest concern with the idea of GDP is that it might not prioritize some things that within society are extremely important.
Yes, it does not prioritize measuring them in its contribution. It doesn't measure the distribution of the wealth that it's measuring. And without these rules that we call unpaid jobs, there's no way that societies can thrive. And even in societies now, and when we're observing what's happening in some of our countries or cities or communities where there's increase in crime rate and all these things that are happening, we'll find that it's because these unpaid rules are not given enough attention or are not taking place to the extent that they should. Both parents are maybe working very long hours. You don't see your parents. No one's looking after you. And then all these other antisocial behaviors come into play.
Yeah.
So we have to give provision for both. We have to give provision for the definition of leadership, whether it's in the home or in community and also in the workplace, and be able to measure the contribution of that.
So when you define women in leadership, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, I know when we talk about women in leadership, we're primarily talking about, corporate positions. And if I'm to speak about that, then yes, we see that there's an increase in that globally to about 10%, I think, if we compare over the last decade. But at the same time, I question some of the things that are maybe not being considered when we're looking at women in leadership and how we make it more accessible without compromising things that are still important in the society for both men and women. Yeah, so I think some of the things that organizations are looking at or some beginning to look at is things like family-friendly work policies, maternity and paternity leaves, flexible work arrangements, and more equitable pay. I would say so, yeah. Alongside in more general terms like family-friendly, work policies. So it's not just about what you're trying to make available for the woman, but what you're also revising for the men to make it more equitable so that the woman can actually show up in the way that she needs or would like to show up.
So I want to just throw something or contribute into this, even though I am a man and maybe I shouldn't, but
You definitely should.
I definitely should. All right. So I think I look at there's some countries within Africa whereby the maternity and the paternity leave mandated within law by law are actually different. I believe that the law sometimes puts that inequality towards or against women because a man, even if he might want to, by law, he's not mandated or expected to take 3 months of or 6 months of paternity, whereas a woman is given that ability to do so. So at the end of the day, the only person within the household who can take that extended period is the female. And at the end of the day, you don't give a fair opportunity for a household to allow either one of the parents to equally engage and be present at home as opposed to being at work. And I think that is a systematic and something that's baked in within the law that then creates a very unfair and unequal landscape for women to be operating within.
Definitely. And then when that happens, then usually because of that, then when you're having discussions about who could take on certain roles, that's the point where you'll find women choosing to drop off. Maybe they were getting to an executive position and they decide, okay, now she's the one who's going to quit her job. Coming back to work, is more difficult. Picking up from where you left off, starting the process all over again. And studies have shown that there's a motherhood penalty, meaning when you're a mother, you're likely to earn about 4% less, but there's a fatherhood bonus. When you're a father, you're likely to earn 6% more or to be seen as more reliable and solid. Whereas a mother, you're even scared of asking for a pay rise because you think, oh, I have all these responsibilities, I might need a day off here or there. And so you also understand yourself. And those are the subtle ways in which it affects women in leadership and the number of women in leadership, then progression towards.
So there are two parts to this. The first one for me is to break that idea that women in leadership should be a conversation about women in the corporate world and leading within the corporate world, because I think the conversation is much bigger than that. The question and the conversation could be about women leadership within society, because I think that is probably a more fair representation.
Yeah, unfortunately, because we live in a capitalistic world, if at a very high level of, government and the like, if we don't equate these other leadership roles to us as a figure and economic value, then we're unlikely to change the patterns and thinking around that.
And so within your world, right, what have you felt are some of the tools or some of the things that have allowed for you to be able to take on this big challenge? And when I say take it on, I mean, it can be how do you make changes, but also how do you survive within that?
That's an interesting question because, for one, which is a conversation we also need to have more, is we need to be honest about the sacrifices we're making for the choices that we make. And this narrative of you can have it all is misleading, especially to younger girls and women, and depressing to them because they're trying to have it all, but they can't understand how you have it all in quotes. But in reality, you don't have it all. There's things you sacrificed, and it could be important relationships, it could be responsibilities you have, whether if, as we just discussed, if you're a parent or as a caregiver to whoever you're a caregiver to, or to your relationship in terms of if you have a spouse, there is a sacrifice. And the conversation that we are not having as women in leadership is, what did we sacrifice? The image we try to portray is that we did not sacrifice anything, we just figured it out. So that's the first thing I would say. In terms of navigating the space, for me, it's been mentorship. Having mentors, both male and female, is really helpful because with a female mentor, you get to understand you're not alone in this if you're in an authentic mentorship situation. Second, with mentors who are men, because they are, thriving in that space as it is, you get to understand how do they approach things that makes it work for them, maybe in ways that you've tried and hasn't worked for you. Usually quite soft things like confidence, assertiveness, and the like. But at the same time, we already know there's bias around certain things like assertiveness in women being viewed as aggression rather than assertiveness. Yeah. If you're pushing an agenda, you're stubborn rather than this awesome person who's trying to drive change. If you're caring, you don't get a bonus for being caring. But in performance ratings, we see that men who are caring receive better rating because they are caring. Women don't receive a better rating because you're expected to be caring as it is. So navigating all that, and it's through just having a strong ecosystem around you, but also calling these things out. When it happens, call it out at that time in the environment that you're in, be it to your manager or to whoever you're engaging with at that time. For example, being interrupted is a thing that women learn, and when they get into higher positions in leadership, they become better at managing it and pointing out that I would like to finish what I was saying. And then at the same time, if you are a parent, which I am, by the way, you need to let the people you work with know that there's that part of your life and it's an important part of your life, so that you can also model these behaviors and change culture in organizations or in your space of leadership. So what happens is women sometimes get into leadership and then they are really trying to do their best and break that ceiling. And so they blend into the system versus contribute to making that system a healthier place for women. And so what happens is that woman is in a very stressful and frustrated situation, but at the same time, passing it down to the other more junior or younger females in the organization. But if I come and I model behavior, for example, like I will not be in this afternoon because I'm attending my child's sports day, then what I'm telling everyone is that work is important and these other responsibilities you have are also important. As long as we deliver on what you deliver it, you should also, take care of that part of your life. So those are some of the ways I think that we can navigate that space.
And I love that. I love that because I think it requires a lot of courage. I think it is something that you also do better at it by having a community around you to help you go through it. And so I find it so fitting when you talk about, mentorship, as you realize that you're not alone. That idea of not being alone makes you also realize that you can stand up and talk, especially when you feel so vulnerable. So I think those are some beautiful tips and some beautiful nuggets for different people. You talked about the passion for education. What do you do currently that impact within the African continent?
Okay, so currently I work with the African Leadership University. And the reason I took on this role is because I see how archaic our education systems are. They're not preparing our youth for success in the future. They have colonial tendencies in terms of just follow the rules and get a job that you probably might never get because we have 12 million graduates competing for 3 million jobs. And so that aspect of a transformative education where we're talking about you having real life experiences, like say through internships, through strong social connections that you're exposed to through your education system, entrepreneurial thinking. Even if you don't become an entrepreneur, but you have that thinking, you'll be able to contribute at a way higher level in whatever environment you're in. And the fact that in Africa, we need this next generation of youth to be first good leaders because leadership is a crisis for us, but also to be the job creators for those jobs that we will need. And, we'll be hosting the largest population of global youth very soon. And if we don't prepare for that, then we're in a crisis. So it's an opportunity, but if we don't address it, it's a huge challenge. So my passion for education comes in driving that mission and making sure that across the continent, we are taking this message of this, what is transformative education? What should you be thinking about when you're talking about transformative education? And part of the things that were in my strategies was running workshops with educators so that they can begin to also understand before they get this, the learners get to higher education when they're still in high school or below. What does it mean for you to deliver education that is transformative and that is learner-centered, not you sitting at the front and giving them the 10 commandments?
That is tackling the problem at a relatively young age and trying to make sure that the future society is ready for what opportunities come their way.
Women and more women in leadership in the different spheres of leadership is not good just for the women. It's good for everyone. Everyone benefits from it. Women are more likely to prioritize policies around healthcare, education, and economic opportunities for families and communities, even in their entrepreneurial ventures. And it's already been seen that companies that have more gender diversity within have a higher representation of women in leadership driving that. So the message I'm basically trying to relay is that it's good for everyone.
And I find that absolutely fascinating. And because I find it so fascinating, I'm going to ask one thing from you. Can you please just say your handles or how people can get a hold of you, so that even if what you've said right now resonates with somebody, then what for them? I mean, the next step for them is to find you some way or the other.
All right. So I think the easier way to connect with me is via LinkedIn, which is Katerina, which is the full of Katya, hyphen Nyangi. Right. Yeah.
Perfect. So let's have a round of applause for Katya to be the first Kenyan on the podcast and the first person who speaks both Swahili and Russian. To wrap this episode up, I would love to give the quote for the episode. And the quote for the episode is, "Leadership simply begins with the courage to be yourself, so everyone else can be themselves too." Why I find this to be so fitting for today's episode is because not only did you find yourself in a situation where you had to become a leader, leading your younger brother, and when you had no parents, but you had to find ways of getting through those moments and getting up, dressing up, showing up, no matter the state. And for me, that takes leadership, and that is you accepting the reality of your situation and making sure that you equip yourself to get through it. And there's nothing about it beyond courage to be able to be yourself. I find what you have built and the journey that you've taken to be amazing. And your perspective around leadership and the fact that GDP is such a poor measurement really speaks to the pressure that we find ourselves within society. Sometimes what society feeds us becomes what we believe are the most important functions and the most important things to prioritize. And being able to be yourself and to be able to have the courage to be able to lead really is a testament to that. And so even as we grapple with the reality of life, no matter what you're doing, you are sacrificing something else. And being able to be conscious to that reality, for me, is what I heard you talk about. So the sacrifices we make for the choices we make becomes a very important thing, and being conscious about that is also important. And you have to take the stand, take the lead, put your boundaries, but also normalize certain conversations so that other people can be their authentic selves themselves. It takes mentorship, but it also takes courage by an individual to stand forward and step into that discomfort.
Well summarized. Thank you.
So, Katya, I absolutely really have enjoyed this discussion and the journey that you're on in terms of impacting and making the future generation of African youth really be prepared for the world and the opportunities that are around the corner is so beautiful, it's so inspiring. And I would love to wish you the greatest success going forward. This episode has been fantastic, and I actually feel as though it deserves an encore and a series because we haven't even touched the surface. So for those of you who didn't hear, buyawoman.com is also a blog that you should also go and read because there's some beautiful stories. And Katya, really appreciate you joining today.
Thank you so much.
The Shameless Podcast is brought to you by Transformation Leader, and we're on the mission to impact 1 million African lives by 2026.